I think has done us a great disservice in our own contemporary times.
Well, I think that one of the things I've learned because in the last few months I've done a lot of reading about the Nazi regime, things like I've read accounts from both sides of the battle at Stalingrad. I've read accounts of the Battle of Kursk, the fall of Berlin, Hitler's inner workings in his private life. And what I've come to realize is that while Hitler he certainly wasn't right-wing, he was unique, and he had a philosophical. His main philosophy wasn't right or left; it was whatever advanced as his agenda, and he would use that. So I understand when people like our friends on the left, if you say, "Well, you realize in your political closet you have a skeleton called Adolf Hitler," and they go, ballistic. They do have a grain of truth to it, but overall, his policies were far more left than they were right. And Stalin, it was so bad that the Russians and the Germans, the high command of the German army was afraid that the German soldier would look at the political life in Russia and say, well, there's not much difference between these people, between them and us. Why are we fighting them? That they had to create propaganda in order to convince the troops that the Russians were the big, mean, bad guys. And they were, but so were the Hitler. So were Hitler's gang. And there's a funny little skit. I don't know if it's the two Ronnies or somebody who did it, called "Are We the Baddies?" And two English accented German officers are talking about their cap badges. And somebody said, "Why do we have skulls on our cap badges?" I mean, the Americans, the Allies have stars, and there's bars, and there's, different insignia out there. The British have the cross and all that, but we got skulls. Does that make us the baddies? And of course, they come to the conclusion that they are because of their cap badge. So it was a funny little skit, but it underlines the point that I think that they really didn't fall too much into a particular philosophy other than whatever Hitler could turn his hand to forward his own idea of world domination. And that's what he had as his goal. That's what every tyrant has. And he was no different than Stalin in that case.
Well, I think that the similarities are there. I know that one of the things that academics and people tend to point to is that under communism, there is no private ownership, whereas under fascism, there is private ownership of property, and
it's all controlled by the state.
And but that's my point. My point is that it's not nominal ownership is irrelevant if you don't actually get to exercise the rights of property ownership independent from the central government. In other words, who cares who owns it if the government gets to tell you what to do and not do with your private property, which essentially was the way it was in National Socialist Germany, and of course with some exemptions, but the idea of consolidated central political power and the need to consolidate that power in order to address the emergency, quote unquote, whatever that was, that the government of the day was enlisting society to address. And the sheer brutality of these regimes in the pursuit of those goals, I mean, those are the real similarities. I don't care about nominal property ownership or anything like that. I think I think it's a distraction, and I think that common sense people, when they look at it, if they set aside what they've heard or what they've been taught, but when they look at it, and they look at the behavior of both regimes, and the organization of both regimes and how both regimes regimented and organized society and controlled the education of society and indoctrinated people, or even to say brainwashed them in pursuit of whatever the goal was, that is fascism. Call it communism if you want to, call it socialism, call it Nazism, call it whatever you want. That is the essence of what the fascist state is. It is a dictatorship of the state over the people, and which inevitably leads to coercion, because people want to be free individuals. And when you want everybody to be, getting into line and marching in step with one another, you are going to have to create a police state ultimately in order to enforce that behavior amongst the population, because it doesn't occur naturally.
So all that brings us right back to the original question. Why would you republish this book? What value is there in it when there's so much work out there that does the same thing that's already been published by world-respected scholars and historians that have done this over and over and over again? As I pointed out, it's the most studied event in history.
Well, it's an excellent question, Nick. I don't have the answer, and I'm going to disappoint our listeners by telling people I'm not going to vote. If I had to vote on this one, I think I would have to abstain. I'm that up in the air about it. In principle, I'm opposed to I'm opposed to figuratively speaking, book burning. On the other hand, I'm in principle opposed to publishing Mein Kampf. How do I square that circle? I don't know. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's just one of those things that I have to sit on the fence and say, I don't know, and I'm glad I'm not the person that has to make the decision. I won't be going out and buying it, but if I came across it in my library, I might be interested to pick it up and thumb through it and see what these new contemporary scholars have to say about the whole subject. As I said, I think the compromise is I wouldn't ban it, but I wouldn't go out of my way to republish it.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'll come down a little more on the don't bother doing it, not because I want to limit people's access to information, but because I think there's so much similar or very, very similar information already out there done by other people that republishing it is simply redundant, and therefore why do it?
Indeed. Okay. Well, I don't know if this was as explosive as I thought it would be, but it certainly is controversial. In any event,
it is.
I'm just watching the time here, Nick, and we're coming to the top of the hour. So it's about time that we do our housekeeping, which would be to remind everybody that if you're listening to the podcast, first of all, thank you. And don't forget you can go back and listen to the previous 3 segments of this week's episode, part 1, 2, and 3, episode 161, Nick. But most importantly, whether you're listening to it, if you're listening to us, pardon me, on terrestrial radio, you can go back and re-listen to the podcasts on thenickandjoeshow.com. That's thenickandjoeshow.com. All of our podcasts are kept there in a playlist, so you can easily find what you're looking for there. And whether you're listening to the show live or you're listening to it through the internet or you're listening through it on the podcast, share it with your friends. Let your friends, family, neighbors know about it. We'd love to hear from them. We'd love to hear from you. And let's spread the word about the Nick and Joe Show. And with that, Nick, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Joseph. I wish all of you a good night. And in the meantime, till next week, ubicaritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.